Issues in the News, where we discuss the important events that would have taken place in Guyana over the past week or so. And as is the norm, there is always a plethora of important issues worthy of discussion. Tonight is no different. I want to begin by welcoming all of our viewers who are joining us on television. From Region 5, West Coast Berbice, welcome to another program of Issues in the News. To our viewers who are joining us on television, from Region 6, east of the Berbice River, New Amsterdam, Kanji, and along the Quarantine Coast, welcome to another program of Issues in the News. To our listeners and viewers who are joining us on Freedom Radio from Robb Street, Georgetown, welcome to another program of Issues in the News. And last but not least, to the thousands of you who are joining us on Facebook Live right across the length and breadth of Guyana, the Caribbean, North America, Europe, Asia, and further afield, welcome to another program of Issues in the News. And I see hundreds of you have already joined us. Welcome Pam Singh, Louis Punwasi, Zina Durga, Tolaram Muralidhar, Chi Dev Prakash, Matbar Singh, Narayan Sukraj, Sharwin Siram, Carla Thomas, and so many of you. Please share this program. Share this program so that your friends and followers can join us and we can enjoy the widest possible audience. Press that share button on your phone, on your computer, on your laptop, on your iPad, or whatever device you are using to view this program. Press that share button so that your followers and your friends can join us in tonight's discussion. Also, please ensure that you offer your comments, offer your criticisms if you wish. I want to have an interactive engagement, and I will be looking at your comments, and I will try to answer the questions that you ask or address any issue that you may wish to raise. So please utilize the comment section and interject in that comment section your questions and any issues that you would like me to address. I want this program to be as engaging as possible. I want to begin by addressing the continued GTU strike. We all know that the Guyana Teachers Union continues with their strike action and have mobilized teachers away from the classrooms. Nothing good is going to come out of this. Our government is not opposed to teachers. We regard teachers as the molders of our young people and indeed the molders of our nation. However, we are cautioning teachers not to be misled, not to be misrepresented, and not to be ensnared in an ulterior design. This strike, as the facts will establish, arose out of purely political circumstances. The Ministry of Education and the Guyana Teachers Union were meeting as much as once per month since 2019 and years before that. But in 2018, the last multi-year agreement came to an end, and the teachers union and the ministry were meeting on a regular basis. Issues were being raised and they were being addressed as they were raised. Substantial progress was being made. A lot of benefits accrued to teachers across this land, arising out of this continuous and affable and amicable engagement. These engagements, from all the instructions I have received, were cordial and were constructive. The last of these engagements took place on January the 29th, and the parties left each other in great camaraderie, in a spirit of usual cooperation, and in an atmosphere of normalcy. That was the spirit, that was the atmosphere, and that was the environment in which the last meeting was conducted and concluded. And that was only the 29th of January. The meeting was adjourned and a date was fixed for last Wednesday. Last Wednesday was the date for the meeting to resume and for those engagements to continue. Lo and behold, in a complete and unilateral change of tract, the teachers' union called a strike. No notification given to the ministry, no reason proffered. There was no breakdown in this long series of constant and cooperative engagement. Nothing that the ministry could have deciphered that the teachers' union was going to go into a strike. And in an absolute expression of bad faith and in a unilateral breakdown of bilateral engagements, the strike was launched. And up to now, officials of the Ministry of Education can't explain what changed, because certainly their engagements, which were ongoing for 3 years prior on an almost monthly basis, sometimes with greater frequency than monthly meetings, did not indicate that there was any underlying undercurrents. Of course, there were issues that were left to be addressed. And the ministry was of the opinion and of the view that those issues are going to be addressed in due course. There was no ultimatum, nothing. And the teachers' union just launched into strike action. And those are the facts as presented in the minutes. Those are the facts that come out of the continuous engagements that preceded the strike action. So, as you know, the court made a ruling in the action filed by the Guyana Teachers Union last Thursday. The court granted what is called an interim conservatory order. Well, granted 2 interim conservatory orders. The first one is one that restrains the government from making any deductions from teachers' salaries and wages until the hearing and determination of the action. And the other one is for the government to restrain from discontinuing the deduction of union dues and transmitting same to the union. The discontinuance, the government was restrained from proceeding with its decision to discontinue union dues and transmitting same to the union. The government had made that decision, and this order seeks to put that decision on pause, in other words, until the hearing and determination of the case. These are temporary orders. These are not permanent orders. The case is still ongoing. The judge explained very clearly that he is granting these orders to preserve the status quo so that the case can be heard and fully determined, because at that point in time, the judge had only heard one side. Only the GTU case was before the court. The ministry's case or the government's case was not yet before the court. That was the first time. Thursday was the first time that the case was being called. And it is in that context that interim orders were granted. Apparently, based upon misrepresentations made by the union, the impression was conveyed that these orders were permanent and that the case is concluded, and that therefore the government is permanently restrained from deducting salaries from teachers and from stopping its decision to deduct union dues. That impression apparently was conveyed. And the teachers apparently were ill-advised that the case is completed and that they can continue to stay away from work and that they will be paid. And the union obviously misled itself into believing that it will continue to get union dues. Well, the orders of the judge were temporary, as I said. They were interim. They are interim. And I am convinced that in the end, the case for the government ought to prevail. And when that happens, the interim orders will have to be discharged. I can't imagine that the law would be turned upside down, where an employer will be compelled to pay for work not being done by the employee, or an employer will be compelled to continue to deduct union dues from workers and pay it over to a union, when the basis upon which the government is doing so is not founded in law or in contract, but purely on gratis and on policy. I refuse to believe that a court would think that a government can't change such a policy. Moreover, since the monies that are being deducted from teachers are wholly unaccounted for by the union, a union that has not filed annual returns with the lawful authority, the Registrar of Trade Unions, for over 20 years, where the law requires that these annual returns must be filed, and the law requires what are to be stated in the annual returns. The law specifically says that all monies received must be accounted for in that annual returns. How much is being received, from where, and how it is being spent. That is what the law requires. For 20 years, the union has not accounted for how it is spending this money. In addition, the Auditor General normally audits the record or the accounts of the trade unions registered under the law. The GTU is one of them. For nearly 40 years, the Auditor General never audited these accounts. They were never submitted to the Auditor General for the purpose of conducting an audit. In those circumstances, on what basis should the government or anyone else continue to take workers' money and pay it over to this union who is behaving and conducting its business with such abysmal unaccountability and financial recklessness? So all these matters will be ventilated, and not far from now, a date has been fixed. That date is the 20th of March. So I hope that teachers understand that these monies at some point in time will be deducted. Of course, the court order in its current form restrains actions to be taken in this regard. So there will not be no deduction now. The court order will be complied with. But once that court order is lifted, and it will be lifted because that is the law, once that injunction or conservatory order is discharged, the deductions are going to be made. And by that time, you would have an accumulated amount of deductions because the days are adding up. And only this afternoon, the Ministry of Education sent out a circular to remind education administrators across the region to continue to document absences from work pursuant to the strike action, so that a proper record is being kept, so that at the appropriate time, the deductions will be made. So I thought that I'll spend some time to explain this issue because, as I said, I don't know whether it is intentional or whether there was a genuine misunderstanding. But after the court made its ruling on Thursday last, the impression one got, based upon the social media comments, based upon the press reports, and based upon the utterances of members of the union, that the orders were permanent and that the case is concluded and that the GTU has won. Nothing is far from the truth. The case is still ongoing and the government is still yet to present its affidavit and its legal submissions. That is being, those documents are being prepared as I speak. So I thought I would shed some light on that issue, and I hope that I have cleared up the misconception. So the Commonwealth Law Ministers meeting will take place in Tanzania on March the 4th to the 8th, and I'll be representing Guyana at that very important meeting. The last meeting I did not get an opportunity to attend because I was attending Caribbean Financial Action Task Force meeting somewhere in the Caribbean. But this year's meeting, which is scheduled to take place on the 4th of March to the 8th of March, I will be attending, representing Guyana. Some very important legal concepts are going to be examined at that conference, including topical issues as cybercrime, artificial intelligence, access to justice, gender equality, and such important issues. So I'll be representing the government at that meeting. I also want to inform that the ICC Men's T20 World Cup, as you know, will be held in the Caribbean beginning from June 2024, just a few months from now. The ICC Men's T20 World Cup, and work has already begun in the Caribbean region to create what is described as a common domestic space while the competition is ongoing. This will require legislation to allow for visa and other hassle-free travel across the region. You will recall, and some other special facilities will have to be incorporated in a suite of legislation that each member state will be required to enact for the purpose of the T20 World Cup. You will recall in 2007, when the West Indies hosted the World Cup cricket, or Cricket World Cup, similar statutory measures were implemented. Well, we are doing so again for the purpose of the ICC Men's T20 World Cup. The difference this time around is that the United States of America is included in the territories, in the grouping of territories to host this competition. So we will have to work with Homeland Security and immigration authorities in the US to fashion a communal, legal, statutory framework that will facilitate smooth and easy travel across the region for the purpose of this tournament. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, U.S. representative to the United Nations, made a very powerful statement reaffirming the United States' unwavering support for Guyana's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I would like to welcome this statement. It's a very timely one, and it's comforting to Guyana, and it will go a far way in strengthening our resolve, and will also inspire greater support and solidarity for Guyana's position as we await the determination of the matter at the International Court of Justice. The ambassador said at a press conference at the U.S. Embassy, Georgetown, on Monday, and I quote, "We have been clear in our support for Guyana's sovereignty and territorial integrity as it's laid out in the agreement in 1899, and that no changes in that agreement can be made without being done by competent entities such as the ICJ." And this mirrors Guyana's position. So we are grateful for this statement and for the U.S. continued support, as well as the support of all of our important allies on this question of our national sovereignty and territorial integrity. So I spoke last week at length about Hamilton Green's statement regarding rigging of elections. If I may be permitted to recap, Hamilton Green said last week, and all of you would have read what he said, and all of you would have heard what he said. He said very clearly a couple of things. One, that the PNC should continue to rig elections if that is what will get rid of the devils and the bastards and something else. I think that's how he described the PPP government, devils and bastards. And that if rigging of elections is what will get rid of them, then go ahead and rig elections. The other component of the statement is where he made the racist contention that only one race of people are entitled to govern Guyana. He was speaking of Afro-Guyanese, and he qualified it. He said only the ancestors, the descendants of the ancestors who worked here without pay are entitled to govern Guyana. And that grouping, Afro-Guyanese, welcomed indentured servants to this land and educated them. We all heard the statements, and I said last week that I did not hear any comment or condemnation from the AFC, the APNU, or the PNC. Well, comments have come. Comments have come from no other than the leader of the PNC. And Norton hopelessly tries to put a spin on what Hamilton Green said. And I don't know why Norton thinks that we need him to interpret what Hamilton Green said when we read what he said and we heard what he said. Norton says that Hamilton Green did not say so, that Hamilton Green used the word if. But he said this, which I want to refer to. He said that Hamilton Green is an experienced politician. He's a wise man. He chooses his words very carefully. And he speaks very intentionally. Well, I agree with all those things. I agree that he's experienced. I agree that he chooses his words carefully. I agree that he's deliberate in what he says. Because I heard what he said. And he did choose his words carefully. He was intentional. And he was very deliberate in what he said. And I heard what he said. So no amount of camouflage and disguise by Norton will succeed. On the other hand, Vincent Alexander came out, also in defense of Hamilton Green, and he said that the statements were sarcastic. Imagine that. The statements were sarcastic. I don't know if these guys are senile or they think that we are senile. And neither of them made any reference to the racist rhetoric of Hamilton Green. So Hamilton Green was sarcastic when he said we must continue to rig elections. Hamilton Green was sarcastic when he said that only one race must rule Guyana. Hamilton Green was sarcastic when he said that they welcome Indians and indentured laborers to this land and they educated them and so on, as though we are guests here. Hamilton Green, according to him, was being sarcastic. But none of them answered that. Norton stayed away from the racist comments. So did Alexander. They both only referred to the rigging of elections statement by Hamilton Green. But I just want to draw to your attention or advert your attention to the eventuality or advert your attention to the possibility of what would have happened if I had made a statement like that, or someone from the PPP had made a statement or statements like that. What would have happened in Guyana? And imagine after I made a statement like that, the General Secretary comes on and says, oh, I was being, I don't know, whatever Norton said of Green. And the President or someone else comes on and says, I was being sarcastic. Imagine what would have happened in Guyana. It would have been the front page of all the newspapers, and it would not have been removed from the front page. And you would have had Christopher Ram and Angul Saran. All these people are silent. They would have been leading in the letter columns and in commentaries. Red Thread would have found its voice. Amnesty International, Transparency International would have found their voices. The one-man army, the Guyana Human Rights Association, would have come out swinging with a statement. The Ethnic Relations Commission would have condemned already. All these voices are absent. Such an atrocious, undemocratic statement being made, striking at the heart and soul of our democracy, and such a racist and divisive statement being made, and all these persons and organizations whom I mentioned, and who project themselves as the conscience of this society, as the moral compass of this society, are deafeningly silent. Not a word from Glenlal, who lectures every day about oil and gas and about everything that's wrong in the country. They are all quiet. But if a PPP person had made such a statement, oh my, all hell would have broken loose. All hell would have broken loose. And that is the double standards that permeate this society. And we have to expose it. We have to expose it. My attention was drawn to a letter, to an article, in the newspapers, which says that Aubrey Norton has written to the Auditor General for a probe of spending on public sector projects. And I'm trying to understand what Norton is seeking to achieve. The Auditor General has a defined function. It is contained in the Auditor General Act and in the Constitution of Guyana. The Auditor General has to audit all expenditure of public funds by all the public authorities and state agencies and government ministries. All, not only in public sector projects, and as well as, I think he said, in grants, these grants that the government is distributing. And the Auditor General has been doing that for decades. In fact, young people must be educated and be informed that during Norton's government, from 1980 to 1992, there were no Auditor General report prepared. The Auditor General never audited public accounts for an entire decade, from 1980 to about 1992. And Anil Nandlall, the accounting czar, was working in the audit office during that period of time. And he will confirm. In fact, I recall reading an article that he wrote in the early 90s, where he made reference to a letter written by 𝘗𝘓 to the Auditor General office, instructing the Auditor General not to audit the public accounts of Guyana. You can imagine that? When the Constitution, even the Burnham Constitution said that the Auditor General was independent and can't take directions from any minister. 𝘗𝘓 wrote it in a letter and directed him not to do the accounts. Today, you have audited accounts annually by the Auditor General, and you have a vibrant and functioning Public Accounts Committee chaired by the opposition. That reviews the Auditor General report every Monday or whenever they meet. That is the system of accountability. And that is what the Constitution prescribes. So I don't know what Norton is asking the Auditor General to do. The Auditor General just can't probe something upon Norton's request. And the cash grant that they are referring to. I participated every year in the school cash grant, the Because We Care cash grant. And I know for a fact that the Auditor General plays a part in the distribution, in the planning and distribution of those cash grants. The Auditor General himself plays a part, or his staff, in the execution and distribution of that grant. And that grant is, that list of grantees are prepared by the ministry staff of the Ministry of Education and is extracted from the register in each school. And every one of you who are listening to me and who would have collected that cash grant would know that you didn't collect extra. Neither did you collect short. You collected what you were entitled to. And you signed. There's a paper trail which is audited by the Auditor General at the end of the process. As I said, the Auditor General participates in the process through his office. I know that for a fact. Yet, Norton trying to bring about a probe. Why doesn't he probe the monies that are still missing from Durban Park? 650 million Guyana dollars is still missing from Durban Park. Let him probe that. The Auditor General has said so. And that project was executed by a company that they incorporated at the Office of the President, comprising of people like Larry London and other employees in the Office of the President itself. Let him probe the $160 million that Minister Patterson paid out to a hand-picked company to do a feasibility study for the Demerara Harbour Bridge, which nobody has ever seen. A company from France. He just picked the company just like that. No procurement process in accordance with law. Not even cabinet decision. Let him probe the scales that Patterson bought and paid 100% of the purchase price of and never received the scale. When the contract said that he must pay a percentage as a deposit and await the delivery of the scale. That's what the contract said. He advanced the full purchase price and we never got the scale. We filed an action in the court and then the bond that the scale was supposed to be in after it arrived here about 2 years late suddenly went up in flames. The bond that the scale was stored in erupted in flames 2 years ago or a year ago. Norton should probe those things. Norton should write the Auditor General and probe his statements of poll. Why don't investigate where his statements of poll are, which he promised that he will deliver? Remember he said that to Vice President Jagdeo at a diplomatic function that he will produce his statements of poll. They are claiming that they won the elections and they can't show a single statement of poll or a single piece of paper to establish that they win the elections, and he wants a probe. So that is what you're dealing with here. So when I saw that, the thing jumped out at me. I want to know why you're writing the Auditor General leave his statutory and constitutional function and just decide that he will do a probe because you ask him to. These guys, I tell you. So I see a story that is gaining some momentum in the news. And it has to do with the ownership of the plots of land upon which the Qatari Hotel is going to be constructed. Those plots of land, as you may know, are located on Carifesta Avenue, between Carifesta Avenue and the Seawall Road. The two plots of land, as I understand them, are what used to be popularly known as the Guyana Softball Ground and the National Insurance Scheme Sports Ground. Those are the two grounds. The Georgetown Mayor and City Council seem to be contending that the lands are City Council lands. They have not produced a transport or the evidence of ownership that establishes that those lands are owned or controlled by the Georgetown City Council. On the other hand, the government has done a research through the lawful agency and the appropriate authority. In this case is the Guyana Lands and Surveys Commission. The repository, or one of the repository of all documents relating to government lands, state lands, and public lands. Once the Guyana Lands and Surveys Commission pronounces on those matters, that is conclusive unless a court says otherwise. Because that is the agency that has the lawful authority to make these pronouncements. And also, it is the authority that is the lawful repository of the necessary legal documents that will allow and conduce to such a contention. Now, investments were going there before this Qatari Hotel proposal. And this research was done some time ago. This is not anything new. The lands belong and are owned by the government of Guyana. That entire strip from Everest Cricket Club, well, from north of Woolford Avenue, if I'm to get accurate, north of Woolford Avenue all the way to the seawall are all government lands. You have leasehold interests and so on within. These sports clubs, they have leases. Most of the leases have expired. So when the lease expires, it goes back to the government. It reverts to the landlord. In this case, the landlord is the state. And I recall appearing some years ago in 2009, and I have the case here. I did some research. In 2009, that very ground where the turning of the sod ceremony was held, it used to be occupied by the Guyana Softball Association. Guyana Softball Association was occupying that ground upon a permission or a license granted to them by the Ministry of Education. Because the Ministry of Education was the lessee of that land. All those things have expired. And once the Ministry of Education is a lessee, it was a lessee from the government. It's the government's land or the state's land. I recall Guyana in 2009, while 𝘱𝘰𝘮𝘃 was the Minister of Housing, was the Minister of Education, a notice was served upon Guyana Softball Association to vacate that ground. The Guyana Softball Association filed legal proceedings against the Attorney General, 𝘱𝘭𝘂𝘕𝘍𝑖𝑛𝑑𝑎 Kandai, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Education at the time, and the Town Clerk of Georgetown. I appeared at that time for the Attorney General and 𝘭𝘂𝘕𝑑𝑎 Kandai, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Education. Mr. Rupnarayan Satram and Pratesh Satram appeared for the Guyana Softball Association. I have the judgment here. The matter went before Chief Justice Ian Chang. The Town Clerk of Georgetown was a named party, but they did not appear. They did not appear because they had no interest in the property. After the Ministry of Education terminated the license of Guyana Softball Association to occupy that ground, Softball Association took the AG and the Ministry of Education to court. And I appeared for the AG and the Ministry of Education. Why did Guyana Softball Association take the Ministry and the AG to court? Because it's government land. Why the City Council, though named a party, did not appear? Because they had nothing to do with the land. And nothing in the case suggested that they had anything to do with the land. Softball Association admitted that the land was government land in the case. Of course, the case determined another issue, an issue of law. It did not determine ownership because ownership was not in dispute. 𝘱𝑒𝑚𝑝 was claiming that the government was wrong to terminate their license to occupy the land. Not that the government did not own the land. Pulanda Kanai, Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Education, had sent a notice to them for them to vacate the land after their whatever interest they had in the land was terminated by the government. 𝘱𝑒𝑚𝑝 Association, who was there for decades, when they filed the proceedings, they never questioned government of Guyana's ownership or the state's ownership of the land, because that was never an issue. That was never an issue in the case. It was not a disputed fact that is government land. And Hamilton Green again entered the fray. This man serves no purpose, has never served a purpose. Obviously, he is the one who started the confusion in the first place. So I read in the newspapers that the mayor is saying that he would like to go to court. Well, I am happy that he's planning to go to court, because that is where the issue should be resolved. If he believes that he has a claim, let him go to court and establish ownership. The land that the city council owns, having been gifted it from a man named Quinton Hogg, is a different piece of land. And all the city council has to do is to read the transport. And if they have a difficulty in reading the transport, employ a lawyer and a surveyor. And they will be advised properly. Or if they want, they can go and waste the court's time and waste money. But the plans and all the other archival materials are there to establish beyond doubt that the land is owned by the state, that portion of land. GT&T owns a piece at the other end. That used to be owned by GTC. And there are some other persons who have interests. But they are state lands. I believe they got leases. Maybe GT&T has a transport, I'm not sure. But the land in question, lands in question, are owned by the state, not the Georgetown Mayor and City Council. And the Georgetown Mayor and City Council, I know, historically, always had a series of lawyers advising them. I don't know why they have not been able to get their lawyers to advise them on this occasion. And that was leading me to conclude that they are deliberately being obtuse on this issue. Deliberately being obtuse on this issue. So, I'm looking at your comments here to see whether you want me to discuss anything. Again, no questions from you. Somebody is asking whether criminal charges will be filed against former Prime Minister. And they're asking me whether I am going to file criminal charges. And that's a lack of understanding. Government don't file criminal charges. The police file criminal charges. Somebody has to go and make a complaint. And then the police will investigate, and the police will file the charges under the supervision and advice of the DPP. Government has nothing to do with that. That's why government is being blamed for all sorts of things, over which government has no responsibility. And if he says that he will rig an election, I don't know if saying that constitutes a criminal offense. It's a statement that you should suffer grave political consequences if you make such a statement or you advocate such a concept. But I don't think it's a criminal offense. Anyway, so my operator is signaling to me that we are approaching program time. As you know, as I said earlier, I will be traveling from Friday, and I will not be here. I will not be here for next Tuesday, so we will not have any program next Tuesday. So I'll miss you and I'll miss that program. But so I may not be here for the 8th of March as well, and I want to take this opportunity to extend to all Guyanese and all my viewers and listeners Shivratri greetings, in particular my Hindu brothers and sisters. They will be celebrating Shivratri on the 8th of March. So I wish you Lord Shiva's blessings and stay safe until we meet again, not next Tuesday, the following Tuesday. Thank you very much and stay safe. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.